Hi everyone, thanks for joining. Dealing with some technical issues.
That's okay. You
Hey,
got it,
Joyce,
babe. How you
you made it.
doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Yes, yes. I'm
I had
good
a,
in yourself.
I'm good. I had a little panic moment for a second. I was like, oh man.
No,
Uh,
I was about to email you like, listen, it's 7:30. Let's get this popping.
my mama trained me to be on time, and then I was like, I don't know how to use Instagram well enough. Anyways, we worked this out. I think Key is around. Let's see, Key. I tried to. Let's see. There we go. Cool. I think that worked. Oh, nope. Hmm. I
Yep.
was trying to.
Where's
Hey,
Hey,
we did
hey,
it.
hey.
What's up, Key?
For some reason, Miss Joyce just turned sideways on me.
I'm about to fix that.
All
How you
right.
doing, Key?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. You got my message today?
I did get your message. I
All
got your
right.
message. I'm gonna send you a message back, but I appreciate the
Hmm.
ahead of time introduction. I'm so happy to be in conversation with you. Like I know
Same here.
Cam, like me and Cam are cool, but like I'm happy to be in conversation with you.
I'm just always happy to meet people who are killing the game. We need to be with each other, right? You can't be in silos. We're stronger together.
Exactly.
For sure. Thank you both so much for joining us and for being generous with your time. And I'm glad we had a little we worked through the tech hurdle. I was telling Joyce that I had a little mini panic moment. I was like, oh damn, we're gonna be able to figure this out. But we did it. Um, and now we're here on Instagram
I
Live,
have
and
faith in
there's
you, Cam.
thank you.
I do
Thank,
too.
I'm glad you both
If you
enjoy
We're
can't
not
it.
figure
doing
out
all these
Instagram
big
lives, then
things.
I don't know how we gonna get free. Like, you know what I mean?
Listen,
Like,
listen. My mentor and boss and auntie is 76, and I'm helping her with tech all the time. And then for a moment, I felt like I had empathy for her situation. So, anyways, we now have 41 people joining us. So I'll get us started here.
Hello, everyone.
And they can't respond. I guess they can respond. Oh no, Key
It's okay. I
left.
can still say hello.
You absolutely can. I want them to say hello to you. Let me try and get Key back in here.
Oh no. A little technical difficulty, people, but we got this. We got this.
I talk all that
Hey.
mess, and then God was like, "See, this is why you don't talk mess. This is why you don't talk
Uh,
mess."
I'm glad you're back, Key. Welcome everyone. Welcome Joyce. Welcome Key. This is our second night of a three-night sort of mini counter conference, and this came about. It was actually organized, I don't know, starting like Friday. We had a call and was sort of rapid response. There's a conference for most folks probably know, but there's a conference happening in Indiana right now that is the National Conference on Police Social Work, and obviously we think that's ridiculous. Um, and so we tried to figure out what we could offer in a short amount of time. This 3-day mini counter conference is organized in part by the Network to Advance Abolitionist Social Work and Abolitionist Social Work in Indiana. They protested the conference yesterday, and that was on the live stream, but we didn't record that because that's just the smart thing to do. Last night, there was a conversation about why social workers should stop policing in all of our forms. And tonight, we're having a conversation about building safety through abolition. We're joined by Key Williams and Joyce McMillan, and I'm really, really appreciative, one, that y'all responded to the call so quickly and that you're being generous with your time and your work. And I had a thought today just about how generous people are. I mean, the work is about struggle, the work is about freedom, and people are really, really generous, and people don't have to be generous. So thank you both
The
for
work
that.
is also to support your work and get the word out, Cam.
Indeed, indeed, for sure. I want to say two other things before we kick off the conversation. One, Joyce just had her first annual gala this past weekend, and I heard it was amazing. I saw pictures. I wasn't able to make it, but support Joyce's work. Key, I don't know what you got going on right now, but support Key's work. And I also say that Miriam Kaba, the greatest of all time, is 50 years old today, and she's been a teacher for so many of us. So happy birthday, Miriam Kaba. Um, so I
Damn,
think
I'm so disappointed to hear that. And you want to know why? I have to tell you guys this. A friend of mine texted me today and was like, yo, you share the same birthday with Mariam Kaba. And I was like, yes, like this is the shit. But guess
Happy
what?
birthday.
I was
Wait,
thinking her
pause.
birthday was the end of this month because my birthday is the 30th. So I
Okay.
didn't have a chance to Google it or do anything, but I was feeling mighty proud to share birth space time with Mariam Kaba. Now to hear you say this, like I've just been deflated.
Don't be
Oh, I'm sorry.
deflated. You're
Yeah.
still a Libra. That's
No, I'm a Scorpio. I'm the end
damn.
of
I
the
tried to
month.
save it. I tried twice. This is my second. This is my
Yes,
second
this is
failure.
so messed up.
We still
I'm
I
celebrate
just
sorry.
your
reveled in
birthday.
that glory all day. Let's not go off track because I'm gonna have to text this person back a little later.
I'm sorry to be the messenger of this bad news, but
Yeah.
you're close in the orbit, so that's good. Um, so I have a couple questions for us to grapple with around safety, around abolition, and then we'll open it up for conversation and questions from people in the chat. And I would love it if both of you could sort of briefly introduce yourself and how you're coming to this conversation in any way you want to introduce yourself. So I will start with you, Joyce, if you could.
Okay. So my name is Joyce McMillan, and I run an organization called JMAC for Families. And that started because I worked for the non-for-profit industrial complex for a couple of years. And I saw that people who said they were for families weren't really for families. So I decided I was going to do my own thing and actually be for families. It's JMAC for Families. Um, I don't flex on that. Like I can be flexible on a lot of things, but I can't be flexible on what may cause harm to someone that I'm supposed to care for. Um, my pronouns are she and her, and I'm just really about this life to dismantle this system because it's not for us. Just the foundation of where it stems from is slavery, and so I'm here to get rid of it. Overdone. And on to you, Williams. Key.
Yes. Peace, everybody. My name is T. I use here, they pronouns. I am a founding member of the Black Lives Matter New York City chapter and also the Black Lives Matter Global Network. Currently, I'm the national organizer for the Marsha B. Johnson Institute, as well as a climate justice organizer with People's Climate Movement. And recently, in the last month or so, I was and am now currently a fellow at the New School,
Oh, me
faculty
too.
fellow.
Word.
Word,
Oh
word,
shit. I'm 5 years in now.
word. Okay, maybe I can get the 5 year like you. I'm 30 days in, but I'm trying to get like you. I'm trying to get like
They
you.
told me it was gonna be 1 year, but it's been good.
Words. That's what I hear about that. But yes, I'm doing my research on the Anti-Slavery Society of New York and tying it into Central New York to really challenge one, the notion of home and safety, but also this historic notion that New York was a free state or a progressive state, where we actually are named after slave traders and slave owners. And slavery obviously played a huge part in New York City, but also New York large and wide. So yeah, that is my research. And yeah, I come to this work very humble as someone who is directly impacted by incarceration, from my father to my stepfather to my brother, um, brother currently incarcerated as well. So, just really seeing the direct impacts of families and the impact of how incarceration impacts us all. I'm looking to build a better and a safer world. Point blank period, and that's kind of my commitment, is to live in love and liberation.
I found a new partner, Key.
Hey.
Thanks so much to both of you. Thank you, Key, and thank you, Joyce. I'll just say quickly, my name is Cameron. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am one of the collaborators of the Network to Advance Abolitionist Social Work, among other things. But people didn't come here to hear me talk. They came here to hear y'all talk. So, Key, I think you led us in a really nice way into this conversation about sort of safety through abolition. And I think part of the thinking around tonight's conversation was like, we want to take that question head on. And for those doing abolitionist work, we know that like safety is at the root of all the work. But often that is the thing that people put back in the face of people doing abolitionist work. So the question is about like, what is for you, how has abolitionist work and thinking shaped the way you understand safety? And I'll let either of you take that on first.
For me, it shapes safety because if it don't exist, it can't create harm, right? And it goes back, like I said, to slavery. First of all, I want to start off by saying I too was impacted by incarceration, but furthermore, I was impacted by foster care because I have two children that were taken from me, and it took almost 3 years to regain custody of them. And as I studied the foster care system, that became my focus because it's one thing for you to fuck with me, but it's a whole nother thing when you fuck with my kids. And what I learned through the process of what they went through and what I went through is they're the same system. And foster care operates under the guise of protecting children, and the prison industrial complex operates under the guise of protecting communities, keeping other people safe by locking me up, and protecting the kids by keeping them away from me, you know? And that's the whole bullshit of it all. But I'd like to first share and frame this conversation by saying, and I curse a lot too, so expect that people, there's good Christians on here, I apologize. So they strip search children the same way they strip search adults when they're incarcerated. They strip search them under the guise of checking for marks and bruises, even though 86% or more of children who come under their radar for reasons that are poverty related that they frame to be neglect. But why are we strip searching a kid who a call came about not having food in the house? They're both separated from everyone and everything they know and love. They both have set visit times on set visit days. They both have oversight during a visit. They both change homes and cells regularly. They both use garbage bags or pillowcases to change that location. They both have over. We said that part. Well, the bottom line is, it's the same system. They're both paroled back at the end of the day, utilizing the same language too with the visits and the parole and so forth and so on. And I always say any system meant or built to protect children should in no way mimic a system that tortures adults that was purposefully built to do that, right? And so the foundation of it is wrong. But I want to take a second more, not to take up the whole time here, but I want to make a quick connection. 85% to 90% of people leave foster care and go straight into the incarceral state. That's not by accident. Foster care is a prerequisite. So now we look at the 13th Amendment, where it's the only way that you can have incarceration in this country. They said that it was abolished, but it wasn't because they hid it in the 13th Amendment. And we had incarceration, and incarceration started with catching slaves who was incarcerated for running away and the other foolishness and all petty stuff leading up to mass incarceration, where it was the stop and frisk and all this other stuff. So we went from incarceration to mass incarceration so that we could have a mass amount of slaves. And then when that wasn't enough and rap came along and started trying to free the elderly, they started preparing the younger generation to take over and be the next people to go in. Because at the end of the day, there's X amount of bodies that they want incarcerated, enslaved at all times. And that is the connection. So we should not be talking about mass incarceration without talking about foster care. And when we talk about closing prisons, we have to close foster care because we're still preparing people to be in prison.
Yeah, definitely. I think just to add on to all of that, what you just said, one of the things I was talking to one of my homies about is that the space between abolition and harm reduction, and that space between the two. And one of the things that it really comes down to with all of these systems of policing, detention, detainment, etc., is the stealing of resources, right? Regardless of how you look at it, when folks are incarcerated, when folks are placed in foster care, when folks are placed on parole, etc., it is with the requirement to rob them of resources, the resources that one needs to survive and to thrive. When one's incarcerated, just the ideal of touch, just the ideal of getting the medical services that you need, just the ideal of having sunlight, just the real basics of resources, let alone the larger than resources that folks need. That's like definitely, I think my entry point to it is looking at the amount of robbery that happens in communities, for families, the generations that are stolen, that are taken away, the divestment of communities across this country. I think like another thing for me is not just that, it's the cost of incarceration, which goes back to your point around like having a bed. Every bed is $1. You know what I mean? Every bed is there's a $200,000 is spent to incarcerate one person on Rikers Island every single year. One person is $200,000 to incarcerate every single year. You partner that with the fact that 90% of the folks who are held on Rikers Island are there pre-trial detention, meaning they haven't even been convicted of a crime. And so just the process of incarceration and the entire, structure of it, as you said, from slave catching to now private prisons and otherwise, all of that is based in a system of overall oppression and repression and violence. There and just the criminalization of bodies, the criminalization of existence, the criminalization of homeless people, of the poor. One of the main campaigns that really centered it for me was the Swipe It Forward campaign, where we were like, hey, folks are getting arrested for not having $2.75 to get on the train. Like, how is that a possible crime that's leading people to be incarcerated, that's leading people to lose their financial aid, to lose their housing, to have their families broken up? Just not having $3 can be significantly life-changing, just when you engage with police. And so for me, just some of those different ways of thinking about it. When I think about it, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't stop murder, it doesn't stop rape, it doesn't stop poverty, it doesn't stop any of the things that it proclaims to stop. It doesn't stop violence. And so, abolition is like, we have to do something radically different. We have to.
Absolutely. And, for me, everything I do, I think about how foster care, because again, that's my thing, because they mess with my kids, how that relates to prison. So when we talk about how they rob us of resources, they rob us of the resources we currently have, and then they further extend that robbery to ensuring we can't get it. So I've been to prison, I served my time, but I can't become gainfully employed in a place that would actually be sustainable to myself and my family, So they create the recidivism through these laws and practices. And I'll give you an example. When I came home from being incarcerated, I went into a shelter that Women's Prison Association had. I sit on their board of directors today. And I was in that shelter for 4 years. 4 years. And the reason I was in that shelter so long is because I couldn't get any housing through Section 8 or any other program, because my incarcerations were related to drugs. They said they don't want me selling and or using on their property, so I was denied everything. So I got a job. And at the time, this is the Bloomberg administration. This is some time back that we're talking about. And Bloomberg had just created this from welfare to workfare program. So I started working at Time Warner Cable. And minimum paid job, but it was still good benefits, this, that, other resources. And every week I had to take a day off from work to take my check to the welfare office, because I wasn't getting food stamps and I wasn't getting cash benefits because I was gainfully employed, but they were paying my shelter fees. So if I didn't give them my check, I was going to get kicked out of the shelter. And the reason for this, they said, is because in case my income changes, they need to know immediately. But I was like, can we fax it? Can we do this? Can we mail it? Can I overnight it? Like, I tried everything. They was like, nah, you got to bring it in person. But since the internet and stuff had just started booming in emails, I started emailing every person I could find in city and state government about this issue. And finally, someone called me back from Bloomberg's office, and they worked it out with me where I could fax my pay stub in and didn't have to take off, because I had been put on probation at work. And if they didn't step in at that moment, I would have been terminated. But the narrative would have been that we got X amount of people jobs, or X amount of people became employed, and only X amount of people was able to hold that employment. Never talking about what they did to sabotage our employment, right? Making it look like we're the lazy ones, we don't care, so forth and so on. The whole thing about systemic oppression is it's invisible to the naked eye, right? Because people who have not been involved would not know that that happened. And in that moment, while I felt so happy and joyous that I had escaped what was about to happen, when I really became an advocate, because I wasn't doing advocacy back then, I used to just advocate for myself because it didn't make sense. And I used to always say, this doesn't make sense, and get really frustrated about it. But it made sense to them because it was doing what it was designed to do. But how many people, Cam and Key, did not know how to advocate for themselves, did not have access to a computer at work, did not know how to utilize it, and got caught up in that and became the numbers that are now linked to the narratives that they don't want to work because we had this program and they couldn't maintain employment.
I mean, thank you both for all of that. I think there's there's a lot in what each of you said. I'm just going to pull out a couple of things that are floating in my mind right now. One is these systems are set up to protect whiteness and wealth, and like those are the folks who are safe under these systems. And if you're not white or wealthy, you're going to be the target of criminalization and incarceration. So that's a big, I don't know, it's a big teaching around abolition that's been real for me. And I just sort of got that from what you were both offering. Joyce, what you're saying about work, like so much of the way social welfare is in this country is connected to our investments. And Key, you're saying this too, connected to our investments in prisons, in policing, in surveilling, in punishing people and not actually supporting people. And it's done through the like idea that people are working hard or not working hard. And so like you don't get care, period. You're lucky if you get care, and you can only get care if you're considered a good worker. I'm wondering, you know, the other thing I'll just say about what you all said is like the state is basically it's mostly a harmful institution, and maybe the idea is that it's entirely harmful, and I think we could talk about that if we want, but certainly for Black and brown folks and for poor folks and for indigenous folks, the state has been a harmful actor in causing more violence and creating less safety.
Right.
For the wealthy and for white folks, not so much. So that's super real, and state violence also causes violence. I'm wondering, and at the same time, there is harm that happens between people, right? Violence is a very real thing, and trying to like navigate harm and safety is a real thing. And so I'm wondering how both of you are sort of building safety for yourself, for your relationships, for your communities, and what you can offer around that.
Well, I remember a couple of years ago when Drug Policy Alliance was, and this is ongoing, but you know, I really only started doing advocacy work about 6 years ago. So it lines up with about the time Cassandra and her colleagues was really pushing drug reform hard. And I remember white people, I live in Harlem, moving into my building, and they were mad at the kids who smoked in the staircase because there's only 6 floors to my building. So it's a small building. I've been living here quite some time, and the young men, they weren't bothering people. They were just young Black men whose parents said you can't smoke in the house, you have younger siblings or this or whatever it is, right? It's a lack of respect. So white people were really bothered by it, and I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. We're not calling police on people in this building because white kids get harm reduction, Black kids go to jail. Right? We create safe usage for people who use heroin and other substances that are not number one utilized in the Black community. We make exceptions for drugs that are utilized outside of our community, like the difference between cocaine and crack, what they do through that whole epidemic. So I said, you know, I explained all of that to them, and I explained it to the young Black men. And I said, this will be your safe haven. You know what I'm saying? If you want to smoke in the staircase, this is what I ask of you. Don't leave your blunt paper. Don't piss in the hallway. Don't do this, don't do that. You can walk up and down my staircase, you will never get nothing on your shoe, not even a piece of gum, right? And it's because I communicate with the young Black men in my neighborhood, and I create relationship with them, and I see them. People want to be seen. People want to be respected. People want to be treated like humans, you know? And so threatening, making people afraid, that doesn't do anything. That's just what we've learned from the government, that we have been oppressed by, all of us in different ways. Some have been oppressed and they're thinking to the point where they think they're special. They call it privilege. You understand? But at the end of the day, look at what Cuomo's privilege got him, right? A lot of embarrassment, loss of his job, so forth. So we all get attacked in different ways. At the end of the day, yes, he still has sustainability and all of those things. But the point is, where none of us are exempt from harm. He was still harmed because his kids had to watch the news and hear him be called sexual abuser. And I'm sure that had to hurt his daughters, his wife, his family. So we're not exempt from harm. So be kind to others so that people can be kind to you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just to echo all of that, that it comes down to being in a community practice, right? To know each other, to have a commitment to each other, and to have a understanding, and to be that person, right? To be that person that says, no, we're not going to call the police, but here's what our alternative is going to be. And I think a lot of what happens when we talk about abolition is folks don't name the alternative. They say, well, we don't call the police. And then what's the alternative? And so I really appreciate you naming that the alternative for you and for us in community has to be offering other ways that make sense to our community, that will, emphasize safety, and that will decrease interaction with the police. That's like one of the main things is stopping that initial interaction with the police. What can we do to prevent that from happening? I think like this, just for me, it's like what's popping into my head is like there's not enough police training that's going to stop someone from it because of how the system is built in to existing. There's limitations to what a good police officer can and can't do just by the mandatories of showing up to somebody's home where the mother isn't there. And so going back to the foster care case, it's like, okay, well, this was called in, but the mother's not there because she's working overnight. And she has an older child who's there, who's old enough to watch the kids. But now the police are there, and the officer only has really no option other than to do this next step of calling in Child Protective Services. He had, even as a human being, if he has that empathy, if he has that understanding, if he has that forethought to say, if I do this, I wish I could do something different. But because of the system, there's a mandate. And so it limits, and I don't believe in good cop or bad cop, but when it comes down to systematic and structural, oppression, that's like one of the examples that I think about is that power to be an empathetic person is taken away just by the mandates of the system. And so it can, you have to develop those relationships. You have to provide alternatives. You have to, at the end of the day, see people as people, and I think the main thing about this conversation and the conversations that y'all have been having this week is the power and the privilege and the impact of social workers, right? The impact of folks who are supposed to be the intervener, supposed to be the person that navigates the road a little bit differently. And even that comes with its own limitations, its own training as to how to show up in a way that is often based in policing. It's the same type of system applied to social work. And so I think it definitely comes down to community relations, community building, and then resourcing. What resources do you have? And how can we get those in the hands of people before they're incarcerated? I hate this idea that like, I get these resources, no, like what does it look like to provide people safe schools, to give them food, to, stable jobs, stable income? What does that look like before there's an introduction to policing, introduction to juvie, introduction to, incarceration? How can we value and provide those resources?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things we can invest in community instead of all the other nonsense we invest in, right?
That part.
I have a close relationship with Columbia, and I've been blessed that this semester they're going to allow me and my employee who's from a Columbia graduate and my intern from Columbia to pilot a program there called Mandated Support. And that's because the training on mandated reportership is so vague, it puts people in a position to call about any and everything when that's really not what the law stands for, right? The law says if a kid is at imminent risk or imminent harm, and we call because the kid is hungry or because their clothes are dirty, and there's a threat. And what it does is it makes social workers and stuff respond in a better safe than sorry, cover my own ass thing, because it's actually a misdemeanor if a social worker sees something and doesn't say something. And so that's problematic because if you're hiring people that you trust, then you shouldn't have to feel like you got to threaten them to do their job. So the disrespect is not just on the community. The disrespect is on other people too when they say we're going to take away your ability to use common sense, support a person, and show humanity. That's an attack on you as a social worker. who have the ability to do that, but are not allowed to.
Joyce, there's a lot of things that come into my mind right now, but Joyce, could you say a little bit more about mandated supporting and what that looks like?
Well, for me, mandated supporting looks like if a kid is coming to school with dirty clothes, then why isn't there some type of small fund in the drawer at school where we can give the parent a small box of detergent that costs 50 cents a box or something? Like if ACS can partner with everybody, why can't they partner with Tide or Gain? You understand? And make sure that these things are available. Let's partner with the people who can provide resources to the community. If families are hungry, can you partner with someone who's giving out food to make sure that food is delivered to that school X amount of time for the families whose income level is below or whose food stamps have been cut off or whatever it is that may be happening? So a mandated supporter would have the ability to do referrals to places that would actually support the family instead of reporting the family. Because guess what? Only thing that CPS provides, ACS provides, is surveillance. And surveillance is not support. If I call CPS right now and say my neighbor's kids don't have food, they don't come with a bag of groceries. If I come and say their clothes are dirty all the time, they don't come with money to wash clothes or a washing machine. You know? They come with their tablet to write down everything they can find wrong. And they seek wrong out so that they can criminalize and demonize people for a situation that most often people are forced into. As an example, to learn more about foster care as we talk about this criminal justice system and abolition across the board, right? Because you can't get rid of one if you don't get rid of both because they're hand in hand. So I'm on what's called the registry. It's like a sex offender registry. If you come into contact with CPS, you go on this registry and you stay on there until your youngest child turns the age of 28. It has the same impact as a felony conviction. But people don't even know that a registry exists in a lot of cases. So this is what I'm talking about when I say the systemic oppression is usually invisible to the naked eye. The systemic problem is invisible to the naked eye because people don't know. So they see people in my neighborhood that are not employed. Well, you served time for a felony that it wasn't even you who committed. And ACS knocked on my door, didn't like my response, and put me on a list because there's no judicial process to go on that list. It is literally a case manager from the local CPS office, wherever that is in New York State, for the different jurisdictions that says, I think he did it, and I'm going to put him on the list. Right? No check and balance.
I mean, Joyce, what you said is really, really powerful, and this concept of mandated
I appreciate
support.
hearing this the notion of providing what did you say? Providing support and resources, but there was a way that you said it that was really good. I'm gonna try to go back and remember, but there was something that you said that was really good. Sorry, Cam.
Surveillance ain't support?
No, go ahead.
Surveillance ain't support.
That's all they do. And we know preventive services is all about surveillance, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
I was
back
just
to
going
you
to
at
say,
the news station, Cam. No.
I was going to say that the concept of mandated supporting is getting a lot of love in the chat, and I think it's really powerful because it forces whoever's sort of taking that concept in to think about the ridiculousness and the fucked upness of mandated reporting. And it gives people a practice and concept that they can take back to their own communities, to their own work, and say one, look at how terrible this other practice is, and we can't be doing this. We need to really think about this. And then there's another way to think about it, which is really, really powerful. I'll pull out two other things, and then I'm gonna kick us one last question, which is key. You're sort of saying we have to stop calling the police, and our sort of first step of action is to stop that as much as we can, and prevent the police from coming or prevent people from calling the police. And I had a situation in my building a month ago where someone had come and did something in our building that they shouldn't have, and folks in the building called the police, and we got to them too late. Fortunately, we had relationships where we could actually talk to them about that, which goes to your point, Joyce, about having relationships. If you don't have relationships with people in your building, the first conversation can't be you shouldn't call the cops. I mean, it can be, but that's not going to go very well. Unfortunately, the cops didn't do anything, but like, just to say, like, trying to prevent people from calling the cops, to building the relationships and having conversations before things happen. Because when things are in crisis, it's so much harder to navigate. And then 3, there are sort of concepts and practices coming from transformative justice, coming from people just doing the work that others can take up. I think mandated supporting is beautiful and powerful. I think pod mapping is one that many folks are familiar with. I want to sort of open one last question and then ask for folks who are joining us to ask questions. But most of the people on here, I think, are social workers or social work affiliated. And part of what's been happening over the last year is social workers being sort of touted as the replacement for police, either to work in police departments or, and that's obviously ridiculous, or that social workers should replace police. And I think many of us know that that's not the answer. And I'm curious what you would say to folks who sort of are saying social workers should replace police.
I want to quote what Caitlin Becker from Bronx Defenders said in a print today. It was Filter. I can't quote it, so I'm going to suggest to people to Google the Filter and the story from Caitlin Becker. But she said it very well in relation to just that. That is not the role of social workers. And we have tried in this country very hard to align social workers with policing, and it's wrong. Social workers have their own work cut out for them. The police need to just stay out of lanes that don't belong to them, which is the social work lane. It's not that social workers need to go into their lane. They need to stay in their lane and allow social workers to be who they went to school to be and what their heart's desire was to be, which is a help, which is a support.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that, I've definitely heard that call to action in terms of what would it look like to have a social worker show up at a scene of whatever crisis is happening instead of having police respond. And for me, it just always goes back to, why do we have this scene in the first place? Where are the resources? What is the root issue? Which is what abolition works to do. It works to address the root issue. Social workers, police officers, right? The metaphor that we use, or that I always use, is like police social workers. Those are cavity fillings. Get down to the root, get the root canal, like dig it up and figure out what is actually at the root of the problem to not need social workers. I think Elle said it last night that we should be organizing ourselves out of a job. And as an abolitionist, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to out-organize. I'm trying to organize to a point where I don't need to organize for abolition, where I don't need to organize for the divestment from police, like from policing. And so, I think that definitely, like, everybody kind of has their role. Social workers have their role, advocates have their roles. Everybody does have a role, and everybody needs to respect other folks' role. And it's not the role of social workers to show up at spaces where they don't belong. And it's also, which we just talked about a little bit, is changing the practice and the response that social workers are equipped with in order to respond, and lifting and providing more of that freedom and flexibility to be a thinking person, to move towards that, towards alleviating stress and providing resources and the support that social workers are supposed to be working to do, right? So I totally agree with everything that you just said.
Thanks so much, Key. And thank you, Joyce. I mean, one of the things I'm taking away from what you just said, Key, is like, so often this sort of idea that social workers should replace police misses a much broader sort of conversation that we need to be having. And I think that's really, really important. So we got a couple questions in the chat. I'm just going to start offering them. So Don Arkey says, how would you start these conversations in your workplace as an entry-level worker in a mainly white place and you're the only Black femme? So I don't know if either of you want to engage with that question.
I would start it as a social justice call by let's look at who's impacted. Because we love to say that foster care is a good thing, but we know if foster care was a good thing, the people who are there would only get into affirmative action. There has never been anything built in America that's given to people who look like me that white people don't have access to. So I think that's the place to start the conversation, because that sets a framework to say something's wrong. And the second place for me is always the framework of looking at the two systems being set up identical to say that something's wrong. When we talk about these false narratives, they take away the childhood of children. First thing a kid needs is stability. The first thing they remove is stability, right? And in addition to that, children don't even get to be children. In foster care, they're not allowed to have any devices that can get on Wi-Fi. So you have a 12, 13, 14-year-old, it's normal for them to want to be on a device. Their parents, even if they can afford, cannot buy them games like Game Boy or whatever it is that the kids play to their Xbox. They can't have any of those things because they connect to the internet, and they can't have cell phones. So you're policing the children that you claim to want to protect. If these kids really need protection from people and you snatch them out of the home, you think they're going back there? No, right? People don't go back when choice is available. And talk about that when it comes to the DV community. Women stay with men in most cases who, or I'm not even going to say women with men because I don't want to demonize men, but when there's intimate partner violence, right? One partner to another partner, the partner who has less resources is oftentimes the one who's being abused. And that partner will normally stay in the relationship for the resources that are being provided. But if that person had options, they would accept the options and they wouldn't go back. They go back for the things that they need. So if kids really needed protection and you provided them real protection, they wouldn't have to go back to their parents. You wouldn't need to make sure that there's no communication. Don't have a phone. Don't have this. Don't have that. It wouldn't be necessary because you'd be providing them what they need and they would be happy where they are. Happy people don't go back to misery. Unhappy people who try to escape misery go back to misery as no other choice.
Yeah, in terms of the entry point conversation, I know the person that asked that question said it was helpful to everything that you just said. And again, you know, an individual, at some point, you have to make a choice to say something against whatever is being dealt to you that you disagree with. And this is where, like, you know, principles and values come into place. This is where you have to really move with integrity and move towards what you believe is your truth, and what you believe is right. And, you know, I think that the hardest thing is getting over that hump of what is the risk? What is the risk of saying this, I don't agree with this process, or that this process is, you know, going to cause more harm than we intended to. What is the risk of that? But also, what is the cost? What is the cost of these systems? The cost, as you said, Miss Joyce, is generations, is children's lives, is an impact to a real human being, not just paperwork, not just a case number, not just the ways in which we look at people, as you said, in the system that mimics prisons. You know, it takes away that humanity. And so I think one of the main things is putting back into these spaces is realizing the humanity that we're engaging with, right? We are engaging with human beings, with people who have lives, families, etc. And that, I think, is really important. It's important to surround yourself with folks who are like-minded, who have like values, and who are going to advocate with you towards the same exact thing. And so, you know, when you're looking at direct actions, when you're looking at engaging with community members, with advocates, with etc., that is how you get started. You have to be willing to ask that question. You also have to be willing to take that risk, but you also have to build community. Building community, you cannot do it alone. And so, again, like, I think that the network that you guys are a part of even is powerful. It's important to have something that is decentralized, but also something that brings people together, because you're stronger together, right? You're stronger when you're able to say, here's the data. You know, you have people who are good at data. You have people who are good at advocacy. You have people who are good at policy. Everybody has a role. Find your role. Find your role in the work. And you know, there's obviously a network here. So, you know, find your role in the work and find your people. And then, yeah, do that interrogation and do that research.
Thanks so much, Key, and thank you, Joyce. Um, Joyce, you said something about that stood out to me of like the 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 way that these systems have sort of dug so deep into our psyches and into our societies that like we don't think there's other choices besides sort of punishment, incarceration, criminalization, or nothing. And the reality is there's so much more. And Key, I think what you're saying is like so much more happens in relationship to other people, and we have to start somewhere. And sometimes that's one person, sometimes that's a political organization, sometimes that's your sort of day job. But I think that's really important that we have more than one choice, and that like to build those choices for ourselves and for other people requires being in deeper relationship with people. I see Help Black Inmate is asking for support, and they put their Venmo. So if folks want to donate, please do. We're just about out of time. And so I think I'll ask if either of you want to offer a final word before we end our time together.
I would just like to say that oftentimes we say, we want to work ourselves out of work by making life so good that we're not needed. But I think we'll always be needed. So I think what we want to do is make sure that we continue to work, because even if people have the resources they need, people still need grief counseling. People die, right? People's houses catch fire. Like there's all of these other things that happen in life that help to create displacement and hardships. And so we just need to find other ways to process that with them and to help them process it in a way that's less harmful and in a way that they're not afraid to ask for resources and data is not collected when they ask for resources. I mean, this year I gave out about 10,000 boxes of Pampers, and I never asked a question. If they came up when I was giving them out and they asked for a box of Pampers, they got a box of Pampers. It was like, what size do you need? And that's it, right? We have to believe in the good of people. I remember when I partnered with the church, along with a friend of mine, and the church did us a huge favor by asking their parishioners to just bring Pampers every Sunday for a month instead of giving to the church, right? We're going to do this community thing with these two ladies. And so we had these boxes, thousands of boxes of Pampers. And that day they was like, what do you mean you're not going to ask people to show birth certificates? What do you mean you don't want to see a driver's license? We was like, nah, we not doing that. And
like capping your head, that police.
Yeah. And the church learned something from it, because people came up and they were so honest, and giving out Pampers are expensive. The line was really long, right? Circling the block. And people were like, listen, I stood on this line. I hope I can get some Pampers. My granddaughter just had a baby and she's not employed. She had the baby back in March, but I'm not sure what size pamper. Can I call her and find out? Like people were legitly on the line, not just for themselves and their baby, but my neighbor's daughter just had a baby. She's 15, and mom is having a hard time trying to help her daughter with her baby. Can I call her and see what size Pampers they need? And it was legit like that. Everybody who was on the line didn't have babies, but everybody who was on the line cared about someone who had a baby.
Yeah, and that just echoes and doubles down on, and I appreciate you in terms of calling it back in of like, okay, we got people the resources to survive, but what else will they need past that moment of survival? What will they need to thrive and to be able to just live day-to-day life? And yeah, it goes back to having those resources, having community, and being able to work together and being able to see people for who they are and what they need, point blank period. Some of our work has been, and some of the government's work has been, but, out of a COVID response, people getting checks, and being able to use that money for whatever they needed to use that money for. That is the type of world that we should be aiming to do and able to give, and so that folks have the resources that they need, so that folks are able to, to survive and thrive. But then you also mentioned like folks with that own restriction, right? That own, like, this is what we need. We need to check. We don't have trust. We don't have faith that this person is telling us the truth, right? And that is what the institution of policing does. That is what the institution of mass incarceration does. It has you distrust yourself and distrust others. You can't just have faith in your neighbor for the sense of that's your neighbor and they're in need. You have to question, you have to prove, and that is the surveillance state through and through that lives in all of us and throughout the society. And so I appreciate abolition for the radicalness of its vision, right? Of dismantling all of these things, of dismantling surveillance, of dismantling poverty, if that is possible, or at least bringing us closer to the world that we want to see. Violence and incarceration and policing and detention centers, those things only bring us closer to violence. Those things don't bring us closer to safety, to wellness, to etc. It doesn't bring us that way. And so for me, safety through abolition or safety beyond policing, right? Those two things for me go hand in hand, is that we have to have a world and a vision where we go beyond what we've been given, especially as we see that those things do not work. And for me, that is like the main thing. When people try to argue with me about abolition, I'm like, well, what are you doing? How is that going? Like, let's try to do something different, and that's really, what it comes down to for me is having that vision that more is possible than what we are given, than more than what we have, and more than what's been taken away, right? Than what's been taken away from us.
So my last is I'm having a rally on Thursday. One thing that happens is when ACS comes to people's house, they're not read their rights. No one has ever told their rights. Your kids get taken without you knowing your rights. I believe that people should be told their rights when ACS knocks on the door. And the first right that we have is the First Amendment, where we don't have to let people into our home. The Fourth Amendment says we don't have to let you in without a search warrant or some type of warrant. And ACS knows this. And there is a social service law 424 that advises them of this. But because the community doesn't know this, they come in and they take advantage. And so City Council is neglecting to hear my cries to make sure that ACS advises people of their rights once they knock on their door. And so there's a hearing happening at 250 Broadway on Thursday, the 21st at 11 a.m. And so I'm going to rally from 9:30 to 11 as the electeds come in the building and tell them that we already have these rights. They need to share them with the community so that the community know what they are. What is the purpose of having rights if you don't know what they are? And last, I would ask that people follow me on Instagram, follow me on Twitter, and if you find it in your heart, no amount is too small, please donate to my organization, because what I do is set an example of what it means to be a real community organization. I give back. And so it's jmacforfamilies.com. Thank you.
Yeah.
Stay blessed, everyone.
Yeah, I would add, because this is me and Miss Joyce are in New York. Cameron's also in New York, so we also know that there are nationwide folks who are here across. And I think one of the main ones that I like for folks to shout out to is to donate to community faces, donate to JMAC Families for Families, Jane for Families for sure. And one of the projects I'm a part of here in New York is COVID bailout. And so we've been bailing folks out of Rikers Island, which just had its 14th death this year, last Friday. And so we are working with COVID bailout to bail folks off of the island and try to get them out for safety. And so find a bail fund wherever you are. If you're not in touch with a community organization, find a bail fund and help folks get released from prison to be returned back home to their families. Most often, like in New York, some folks are in Rikers Island for $1 bail,
Right.
literally, and can't get off the island.
Yeah,
So
$1 hold. Absolutely.
Yep.
And so with that being said, I want to support Key on that because I give the Black Mamas bailout. And so, we can give and receive, and it's okay. And so you don't have to give to the same thing. The thing is, as long as you're doing your part, just remember this. Barack Obama collected and won. Not saying that he did a lot for the Black community. I'm not going to debate that part. But what I'm saying is he did a $5 campaign. He didn't have big people donating to his campaign. It was people like us who knew change needed to happen, who mailed in $3, $5, $10. So don't think that if you have something to give to whatever organization is important to you, that there's an amount too small for you to give. Any and every amount helps.
Right. And support abolitionist social workers. Make sure you sign their letter. If you
Absolutely.
haven't, make sure that you follow the calls. Make sure that you stay engaged. Make sure that you stay engaged. I think that's like stay engaged. Don't come to just one rally. Don't come to just one conversation. Don't donate just one time. Find a way to stay engaged consistently, which again goes back to finding your people, finding your community, and digging deep to dismantle and disrupt.
Absolutely. Cameron, you're amazing for pulling this together. Thank you.
Well,
Thank
it
you,
was a bunch
Key.
of us. Thank you both
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
Key,
much. It
we
was
listen,
a
gotta talk.
I appreciate the ideal of a mini counter conference. Like that is rapid response organizing, like really quick, and it's very powerful. And
It
you guys have
is.
made ripple effects to at least give a counter and to bring this conversation to the surface. So very powerful, and appreciate being a part of it for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank
Miss
you
thank you
for
Joyce, I
both.
might
having
try
me.
to
And
see you
Key,
on Thursday morning.
yeah, 9:30, 250 Broadway. We rallying until 11 o'clock when the hearings start. So it's just a
All
quick
right,
hour and a half. But Key, also, this new school thing, we gotta talk.
let's talk.
All right, we'll get
All
together. We
right.
gotta be here
I'm
on that.
glad y'all are now connected. We will make sure to share
I got your
on our
email and I got a response, so it worked out.
All right.
All
thank
right.
thank you
Thank
both
you
so much.
guys. This is
This is
beautiful and
powerful.
Thank
powerful.
you.
This wouldn't have been possible without you both. And I just want to say, support JMax for Families, support COVID bailout. There's someone in the chat, help Black inmates looking for support. Support them if you can. I want to thank you both so much for reminding me that building abolition through safety is not just about survival; it's about thriving, and that's the thing that I'm sort of sitting with right now. So thank you both,
Thank
until
you.
soon.
Peace.
Peace.